Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be continuing our discussion on the Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. We're picking up where we left off, which was chapter 5 to 8, so let's do this. So chapter 5 starts off with June going to Dr. Jennings' doctor office, and the author describes his office as maintaining a 1970s look with sort of a parallel of modern equipment. And it's interesting that that is kind of a continuous theme in this book so far, is that you have the crossroads of old and new. So June goes to this doctor and tells them of her episodes.
I see dead people.
And they kind of just discuss what's happening and if there's any patterns. We discover that there's 3 visions that keep repeating: a horse, a red door, and voices, like this voice that she keeps hearing. In chapter 5, we also learn that Mason is not only a companion of June's, but the sole beneficiary of her estate, which to me seems a little curious. After the doctor visit, June drives to the church in order to gain historical information on the woman in the picture. And on her way to the church, she sees the red door and chooses to ignore it and consider it to be a figment of her imagination. But she feels the presence of it, like a watching.
I'm watching you.
As June approaches the steps to the church, she seems to believe her own vilification.
I'm a monster!
As if she is unwelcome, unwanted in this space, because she feels uncomfortable by it. And the pastor, as she walks in, notices it and says, what are you waiting to catch on fire? And she June just kind of rubs it off, but it seems like she kind of is.
Maybe.
So as June and the minister Thomas go downstairs to investigate if there's any record of Susanna Farrow's birth certificate, they don't find anything. But they do instead find that June Farrow is actually recorded as a baptism, which is a pretty good indication that June came from the past. We also discover that Susanna's death happened from jumping off of the falls that are close by. So it seems like Nathaniel Rutherford drowned in a river, in that river, and then her mother jumped off the waterfalls of that same river.
That's unfortunate.
In chapter 6, June goes back to her house and rummages through all of their family documentation and pictures in order to make connections to try to find something that she might have missed.
I'm searching the joint, looking for clues.
She's trying to connect some dots, and in order to do that, she makes a huge mess, like a web of papers and different pamphlets, tax receipts, and lo and behold, Mason comes by. He sees the chaotic disaster.
Ah, my clues!
What clues? This is the work of a serial killer.
And it's obviously an indication of you crazy girl.
Boy, you girls are crazy.
Mason looks at her and is like, okay, what are you not telling me? And June feels like she can't lie and says, I have the same thing my grandmother has. And they kind of have a moment where he's like, why didn't you tell me? We had a deal that if this were ever to happen, you would tell me. And she's just like, I didn't want it to be real. He's an understanding, compassionate guy, and he really gained some points here. My suspicion was kind of piqued when I learned that he was the beneficiary of her estate. But then he says, have you been seeing Dr. Jennings? And June says, yeah, I've gone. And then he says, okay, well, next time I'm gonna come with you, and then we can figure out what to do next. And then June whispers, it doesn't have to be we. And then he says, it's always been we. That moment was so touching. I loved it. It was the perfect thing that you could say, as in we're always gonna be together and we're in this together now. I got you, girl.
I got you, girl.
So Mason leaves, and then I believe the next morning, June wakes up to find Birdie in the living room observing the mess that she didn't bother to clean up. Birdie now knows that June is suffering from the same condition that her grandmother went through, except Birdie, she says that June isn't sick and that she has more information she's unwilling to share because she has a secret that she's kept and has promised to keep to this day.
Secrets?
but instead goes upstairs, grabs a letter and says, part of that promise is me giving you this letter and I can't interfere anymore. And this is all I can do for you. And of course, June is just like, you're like my closest aunt, essentially. Like, what are you talking about? You can't like tell me what's happening. And is like prepared to storm out and leave Birdie at home. But Birdie's like, no, you stay. I'm gonna go. You have to figure this out. And Birdie leaves, leaving June to open the letter alone. And when she does, she sees an address and a note that says, trust me. The address is 46 Hayward Gap Road. June knows where that is, so she takes the truck and goes and drives there. When Jude gets to 46 Hayward Gap Road, it's basically an open field with a dilapidated farmhouse with peeling white paint and the bones of a pre-existing barn, and that's pretty much it. So she walks around and doesn't really see the significance of anything, but does feel like she's being watched again. June suddenly starts to feel like the environment shift and a pressure on her arm, and she looks down. There's a moth there, a large moth with like a wingspan larger than a palm, and its gray wings have red eyes, like red dots that look like eyes. And as June brings her arm up, the moth travels to her hand, and by looking at the moth and then at the environment, it sort of opens up a new reality, and she can see what the farm used to be, with tobacco drying out, like a newly painted fresh farmhouse. The barn is erect, like everything is as it should be, as it would be if it was like a working condition. As the moth like takes off from her hand, the vision kind of dissolves and she goes back to her original time and reality. One of the important aspects here is that June, instead of rejecting the vision that came with the moth, she embraces it. She looks through and accepts that this could be real, instead of always like giving a mantra of it's not real. Despite that, she does freak out, gets back in her car and races away. And as she's on the road, I think back to downtown, she sees the red door. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but Birdie said if she sees one of these red doors, to walk through it. So June takes the opportunity and Birdie's advice and drives or walks back to the red door after slamming the brakes and proceeds to open it. June reaches for the handle and opens it up and sees another reality similar to her own, but the environment has changed. The wheat fields are blowing in the wind. The trees are bowed with like a wind sort of. And so she takes a breath and completely walks through the door and is in this windswept area, turns around, and the red door is gone. And that's how chapter 8 ends. So now I'd like to discuss some of the themes of mystery, romance, supernatural, and family secrets. So in these 4 chapters, we see the blurring of reality and imagination. And it takes place sort of at Dr. Jennings' office, when you see the mixture of the timelines just in that guy's office. Additionally, we have the 3 symbols. So what does the horse mean? The door is a way to transport or walk between 2 different timelines or worlds. It might have more than that. It being red, it could be ominous. Red is not typically something that's like a positive color, well, unless it's like romantic, but this feels kind of, it could be scary. And then we have the voice, the man, whatever this voice is. It's connecting and calling to her, but we don't know for what reason. And the horse, I have no idea. We also see in this 4 chapters that June embraces her gift, with the key moment being when Birdie confronts her about it, saying, like, open yourself up to it and take the next opportunity to go through the red door, which June does. And then also the moth, having it land on her and June sort of inviting it to expand her vision into like this past like sequence and sort of guide her and lead her into whatever this experience is going to be. And it's interesting because a moth is often drawn to a flame. And so if you get too close, you might burn. So if June kind of takes that similar metaphor and she's the moth, if she gets closer and closer to her family's curse, she herself might catch a flame. Hopefully she doesn't get too close to wherever this is and she stays at a safe distance and we're cool. The second sort of theme is family curses and dark legacies. We learn that the Farrow women always have one daughter that keep the Farrow name because their lovers or partners die young or end up leaving mysteriously, which might play into June's eventual fate, that this pattern is going to be repeating through her, even though she's taken steps to prevent her from like entangling herself with a romantic interest, which is why Mason and her kind of are like in the friend zone mildly, because she doesn't want to have a child and then repeat the sequence again. She wants it to end with her. And then you also have the mysterious deaths in this family. So you have Susanna dying from like jumping off a waterfall, and then her dad dying in the same river, Nathaniel Rutherford dying in the same river. But this leads me with the river anyway back to, is like the river some kind of significance? Like, does the river call back to each generation in order to reconcile something? Like, is the river important in some way beyond just a focal point of tragedy? There's also the romantic tension. Mason and June have an obvious love for each other, but I was suspicious originally of Mason because he is the sole beneficiary of June's estate. But then he says that line that it's always been we, and that just like melted all my suspicions away. And I really hope that it's valid, because if anyone ever said that to me, I'd be like, okay, like we're good. We're together forever. So yeah, hopefully he's cool there. But there is romantic tension because June is sort of trying to keep Mason at arm's length to stop her from falling in love and then maybe having a child and then repeating whatever cycle that she's caught up in. So she kind of wants to rely on him, wants to phone him whenever there's an emergency or some kind of like painful situation, but she denies herself that satisfaction or that comfort because she's trying to not only protect herself, but also Mason. The fourth theme is the supernatural and transformation. So it largely circles around the red door as an avenue to walk through into a different plane of existence and therefore transform yourself from denying the curse to accepting that this is real. And the description of the environment on the other side of the door as being turbulent might represent like a foreshadowing or a personification of trouble not far behind. And then there's also the symbolism of the moss that I talked about earlier, and how its red eyes might symbolize June awakening to a new reality or a vision, being able to see with true intention the curse before her of being able to go into the past. There's also the usual motif of a moth being drawn to a flame, and whether or not the flame is her family's curse or legacy, or if it's something in the past that will draw her in and want to keep her there. Like either her mother or her Nathaniel Rutherford, if that's her dad, or maybe some other love interest will kind of draw her in. Or maybe there's an evil in the past that she has to overcome in order to break this curse and maybe like set her family free. Okay, that's it. Thank you guys for following along. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section. Then I'm going to leave you with some questions. Is June's journey a curse, or is it a path to self-realization? And will Mason stand as her savior, or will they twist it up and he become her downfall? I guess we have to keep reading. Okay, thanks again, everybody. I look forward to chatting with you next time. Take care. Bye.